Excellent. Well, we are just about to get started on the digital leadership badges and nested approach. And today we have Justin and Christian from the University of Montana Western, and we're really looking forward to learning more information about badges. I've put the link to the course in the chat, and once again, once the recording is all done, you'll be able to access it from there. So I'm just going to mute myself, and Justin and Christian, take it away from here.
Okay, awesome, thank you. And give me just one moment here. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, let me know if you're able to see that.
Yes.
All right. Okay, so greetings. Our presentation is on a pilot project to use open digital badges to recognize Montana Western students for knowledge and skills for which they're not currently being recognized. In particular, we're interested in assessing and recognizing our students for their 21st century skills, also known as their soft skills, aka their human skills, also known as their power skills. Whatever description you prefer, it's those skills that help us interact with one another and tend to be highly sought after by employers, yet are notoriously difficult to assess in meaningful and reputable ways. Here at UMW, we're working on several micro-credential projects, which largely came about through a grant from the National Science Foundation to implement and study micro-credentials. And in this session, we'll describe one of our badging projects, using badges to recognize leadership skills in business students. My name is Justin Mason. I'm the Director of e-learning here at Montana Western, and I'm happy to be joined by Dr. Christian Gilde, Associate Professor of Business and Technology, also at Montana Western. So here's our agenda. I'll start by discussing why educators might care about things like badges. Then I'll cover badge technology and features. Then Dr. Gilde will take over, sharing work on leadership badges, covering theoretical grounding for the badges, then going over the three different types of badges: individual leadership, team leadership, and organizational badges. So with that, most conference sessions on the topic of open badges, including the ones that I've done, tend to begin with a thorough description of what badges are, the technologies, the features, the metadata schemas involved. And I'll get to all that, but I'd like to try something a little bit different this time around. I'd like to start with just a simple and bare-boned characterization of what badges are, and then spend some time talking about why we might even want something like badges. So, put simply, a badge is just a digital representation of a claim that we make about what someone knows or can do, or experiences that they've had, or other claims about learning. I like Brian Mather's description. A certificate is just an offline badge. You might know Brian Mathers for his work with open education and his illustrations about open badges, which you can find at least one of his drawings in every presentation on open badges ever presented, mine included. So one of my favorite definitions is one of the first definitions, which came from Carla Casilia and Aaron Knight in 2012, which is open digital badges are web-enabled micro-credentials that contain specific claims and detailed evidence supporting those claims, which can then circulate in digital networks. So, quick conceptual caveat. Good, I was able to say it. If you've heard of open digital badges before, and what comes to mind is something of a gamification tool or strategy to extrinsically motivate students, similar to the way that points and leaderboards supposedly motivate students, then please note that this is not actually what we're talking about when we talk about open digital badges. If that is your experience with digital badges, I would just ask you to, for the time being, try to set that conception aside and allow for kind of a fresh idea of what badges are and what they might be used for. Did you know when badges were originally developed, largely at the Mozilla Foundation, but also through the peer-to-peer university, they were purpose-built to recognize significant learning that happens outside of formal schooling, that is, in informal and non-formal learning contexts. Now, why might educators, either K-12 or post-secondary educators, be interested in a technology that was designed to recognize learning in informal contexts? Or to put it in the way of Casilli and Knight's definition, why might educators, or for that matter, learners, want the ability to make specific claims about learning and then support those claims with detailed evidence and allow those claims to circulate in digital networks? And what I argue is that calls to support lifelong learning and calls to make learning more equitable suggest a need to take seriously ideas about meeting learners where they are and recognizing learning that is embedded in particular contexts or in particular communities and even in particular practices, and then empowering learners to take greater control of their own learning record and hopefully by extension, greater control of their own learning. So in this slide, I attempt to illustrate an idea, and it's the idea that learning happens across our lives, and learning from all aspects of our life profoundly impacts what we know and can do, yet most of our life's learning goes unrecognized. Our life's learning journey is a bit like the analogy of the iceberg, right? Only a small part at the top is visible, but the bits that are hidden are still there and still definitely count. So learning through formal schooling is recognized via a degree and a transcript. But that's just one aspect of learning that's significant in our lives. And even this visible part, I'd argue that transcripts are not especially transparent to someone reading them and trying to determine what a student actually learned and can do as a result of their time in college. What is a transcript? It's generally the name of the course and the letter grade that the student earned, right? So think too about all the valuable learning that happens in the co-curriculum. Student workers, for instance, workers in the library, acquire skills on the job about information and digital literacy and customer service. Student officers in clubs lead members, market their clubs and events, and organize projects. This is all significant learning. How might we make it visible and reputable so that it too may be more easily counted and valued by others? Of course, there's our professional learning and training and the learning that happens in our communities and our lives. So all this learning is valuable, but not visible. So back to the question, why might educators and institutions be interested in open badges and micro-credentials? Because assessing and recognizing lifelong and life-wide learning, where learners are busy adults with jobs and families, will most likely involve learning that happens in starts and stops, but ideally won't involve systematic penalties for those starts and stops. It will most likely involve learning that is episodic and occurs over shorter time spans than traditional degree programs. And it will hopefully involve learning that is highly relevant and personalized to, and perhaps even embedded in, the learner's real life work. And it's hopefully a learning experience that will build upon and make use of the learner's prior learning and experience rather than ignoring that learning. Or even worse, treating learners who fail to earn the predetermined number of credits like their learning up to that point didn't count for anything, which is of course now the case that we have, which for those who have some college but no degree. So this leads, all of this kind of why we should care leads up to the first noteworthy feature of badges and micro-credentials that a lot of people are very interested in, which is the fact that they are stackable. So I'll try to describe what stackability means with an example. Think about the knowledge and skill of a project manager, right? A person whose task it is to guide projects from start to finish so that those projects are completed in the right amount of time, for the right amount of money, and in a way that accomplishes everything that has to be accomplished. If we wanted to recognize someone for having acquired knowledge and skill needed to be a capable project manager, we could issue them a project management badge. And in fact, the Project Management Institute, or PMI, does use open badges to recognize people who've earned their PMP certification. But project management, as we know, isn't a single skill or a single bit of knowledge. It consists of many knowledge areas and many skills. For example, writing project charters, project scoping, scheduling, budgeting, communication, risk management, and so on. Each of the knowledge areas could be their own digital badge. So you can see how this might be compatible with how we tend to think about learning and working through a curriculum. In that if someone wants to earn, say, the big PMI project management badge, they could work their way through earning the supporting badges one by one. And once they had earned all the supporting badges, then they would earn the big badge, also known as the meta badge. Now, a busy adult might not have time to complete all of those supporting badges at once, but maybe they have time to earn that first project charter badge. Then they might go away for a while. Then they come back and earn the project scope badge, and so on until they finally earn that meta project management badge. Same idea could work for college students, right? Let's imagine micro-credentials that correspond to program level objectives. Students earn them not in a single course, but throughout their entire college career. Here's another example of that stacking capability of badges. The Penn State University Library has developed a badge program with this kind of stacked hierarchical representation of knowledge and skills that students acquire in the library because it wanted a better sense of what value it was offering to the university. Here, looking at the slide, on the left-hand side, you can see we have the blue meta badge, which is the Savvy Searcher badge. And to be a Savvy Searcher means that you have some sub-skills that support that. For instance, a Savvy Searcher is good at searching keywords. A Savvy Searcher has learned how to refine their search based on the results and has learned how to recognize bias, right? So once the person earns those supporting badges, they then earn the meta badge. And as they earn everything, they can even stack their way up to earn that, what they've called the Penn State Uber badge. So what does this enable the library to do? Well, it lets them quantifiably track their contribution to student knowledge through the services that they offer at the library and the training that they offer. It also lets them better customize that training that they offer students based on what the students already know. So what else do badges do? And badges, okay, so badges being these digital and shareable representations of claims about learning. What else do they let us do? I think perhaps most importantly, they let us attach a lot of really useful data about our digital claim that we're making, and they make it very shareable. So in this slide, you see the kinds of data that we can attach to a badge. Open Badge metadata is standardized. It uses the Open Badge 2.0 standard, which is maintained by the organization IMS Global. Technological and information standardization is important because it means that you can have multiple companies that will help you create, store, share badges or micro-credentials, but all these different companies and all these different technical platforms, they're all playing by the same technical rules. So for example, if the University of Buffalo uses the Acclaim badge platform and they issue me a badge from that platform, I can take that badge and add it to my Badger backpack, Badger being another different badge company. But I can move my badges from one platform to another because they're all playing by the same technical rules. This makes badges very portable and enables learners to control their own learning record of badges. Now, that learning record currently exists as an online badge repository called a backpack. And that's something that learners retain control of forever. There's also really interesting work that's happening kind of related to this, the idea of a comprehensive learner record that can take on even more than just those badges. So in a badge, the kind of data that we can add and the kind of things we can add to support the claims that we make are the identity of the institution or the person who issued it, the identity of the person who earned it, the date it was issued. This is one that a lot of people like, the date that the badge is set to expire. So at least one program here at Montana Western uses badges to track the certifications that its students need to have, but also to help them keep track of when those certifications expire. And using badges is something they can do for that. A description of the learning or the achievement criteria that spells out in glorious detail how the assessment works and what exactly the student has to do in order to earn that badge. And then evidence, right? And evidence is a big deal because evidence can be unique and individualized to each learner of the badge and supports the claim that's in the badge about what the earner knows and is able to do. Evidence can include things like documents written by the learner, video of the learner performing a demonstration, maybe a website that the learner has created or that has content about something that the learner did, audio files. Really, it can be anything that can be digitized, that can be added as evidence to a badge. Now compare this to a college transcript, which simply states the name of the course and the letter grade earned for the course. Right? Which is more likely to tell us what the student actually knows and can do? Okay, next we have endorsements. We tend to care about what other people say about a person and their skills, or say about given training and whether that training was of quality. And the endorsement feature gives us the opportunity to be more than just learners in search of recognition. The ability to endorse other badges and others for what they've earned acknowledges that learners can be recognizers in their own right. Hashtag open recognition. So there's also alignment to standards, which are important because, again, all of this data helps us make claims about learning and makes those claims shareable and understandable from one context to the next. So put another way, these are tools that can help us make claims about learning that is valuable but has been previously invisible, right? This helps us make learning visible. So just a quick note, what badges and micro-credentials could mean for higher education. As we see it, they offer one possible way of making higher education a key stakeholder in lifelong learning, and thus hopefully keep higher education relevant in the coming century. In this vision, learners are able to continually return to college as needed. Post-secondary institutions formalize relationships with employers and communities using badges and micro-credentials as ways to co-value and co-recognize learning, so that, for example, workplace learning might be more easily recognized by the institution as relevant prior learning. A great example of this can be found right now in the collaboration between Northeastern University and IBM, where employees at IBM can earn badges and then apply those badges for credit in 4-credit programs at Northeastern. If that sounds interesting to you, I encourage you to check out the work of Sean Gallagher from Northeastern University. So in this vision, the nature of talent pipelines between higher education and employers changes from this sort of one-way pipeline that we see in the slide to something that looks a bit more like this, where there's a constant back and forth and learners can dip into education and share learning from one context to another as needed and as is useful. In this vision of micro-credentials in higher ed and lifelong learning, I think our notion of retention changes. It shifts from one of keeping students until they graduate a 2- or 4-year degree program to one of maintaining a learning relationship with the student that may last for decades, and one in which the student is a co-author in the curation of their own learning record. Okay, so now that I've provided a brief primer on what digital badges are and why we might care about them, I will hand the presentation over to Dr. Christian Gilday, who will discuss our leadership badges at UMW.
Justin, could you do me a favor? I have an emergency. Could you talk a little bit about the leadership badges and stuff like that, and we'll get back to you in a second.
Oh, you bet.
Sorry for that, but I might have to go to the hospital.
Oh no, okay.
So I will be right back and let you know. Okay, just talk
Okay.
about a little bit about the levels and stuff like that.
You bet.
Sorry for
You
that.
bet. No, it's totally okay. Totally okay. Don't worry. I hope everything's all right. Okay. So so what we have here are this nested approach to leadership badges, and it's a recognition, right, that leadership kind of happens in multiple levels and multiple contexts. It can happen at the individual level, the team level, and the organizational level. And here, this is just a representation of that same idea, right? That leadership skills can be nested in these different contexts. So the interesting thing about this, for me, as someone who has an interest in micro-credentials and digital badges, this relates back to that stackability of micro-credential, the ability to think in terms of a pathway and how these smaller sub-supporting skills might then stack up into, it might be the case that leadership at the individual level in some ways can stack up and lead to opportunities to leadership at a team level, and likewise leadership at an organizational level. And pardon me, I'm going to do the thing now that you're not supposed to do, which is to read off your slides. So theoretical grounding. It's a 3-ring nested model, which obviously Dr. Gilda knows far more about than I do, but is an established approach, I think, in the business education world. Individual, team, and organizational levels are indivisible nested dependencies. Organizations treat individuals and teams as resources to be utilized, which illustrates a connection. And this shows that organizations consist of individuals and teams who share similar beliefs and common goals and have to work together. Okay, so this is just a screenshot of the Moodle page. All right, I'll skip ahead here. So for this Strengths Finder from Gallup, which is kind of a personal approach to reflecting and sorting out your own strengths, this has been around for a long time. Okay, so there's a lot of usage of this. So that was, I think, one strong reason for using it as part of the assessments here is that it has such a long history. And what this allows us to do is develop a deeper understanding for strong skills, learn how to navigate strengths in a strengths profile, work better with others by using one's prevailing skills, explore how to improve a professional career, find ways to develop professionally, and perform at the highest level possible. Okay, and here's an example of kind of what this assessment through the Clifton Strengths assessment might look like. Okay, team leadership badge. This is another kind of established practice in business education. I believe, again, Dr. Gilda could talk more about this, but I believe this is something that originated at, like this is like a Harvard activity, I believe, where it's like a scenario, right? It's a scenario where a team is formed of students, and this team is there to, well, maybe I'll continue to read off the slides, to learn how to build, participate in, and lead effective teams.
I'm back again.
Oh, hello.
Let's see, can I start my video again? Okay, I have to do that.
Yeah.
So sorry for that, everybody. I tried to, we'll see what happens, but tried to take care of an emergency, so sorry for that. Could you go back to the last slide, please? So, as Justin already told you, we're trying to use those badges in a leadership course and try to use different levels, basically, to award different badges. We have an individual level, we have a team level, we have an organization level, and those levels are codependent on each other. They but it's called nested. So in this case, when we talked about in the beginning, the individual level feeds into the team level and also into the organizational level. And important thing to say here is like, it's kind of a collaborative process where all of those different management areas have to work together in order to make it work. And we try to figure out how can we award a badge for each of those areas. And I think Justin already told you a little bit about the individual level. Thank you very much. Could you go now to the team level? Then I will tell them a little bit about the team level. So you guys have heard that we have something for the individual level, basically. Leadership badge that tries to figure out what are your individual strengths and weaknesses, and how can you figure out if you have those leadership skills, if you're really a natural leader, or if you have to work on your skills. Another badge that we kind of can award is the team level, or the team leadership badge. And what this is all about is we use a simulation for that from Harvard Business School. And what the simulation does is it asks a team of 5 people that play different roles to climb virtually Mount Everest. They have certain tasks, they have a certain profile they have to adhere to, they have to meet certain goals. And what they do is they shows them how leadership qualities and group dynamics works without letting them actually climb an actual mountain. And this team has to contend with different information that they get along their climb. What it is basically they have to think about the weather conditions. They have to think about the health conditions that the individual members have. They also have to think about the resources they have in order to climb the mountain. In this case, we're talking about 30,000 foot, basically. They also have to think about the individual goals they have. Each team member, what kind of goals do you have here? And then they take all this information in and try to decide, so do we as a team go up to the mountain, to the next base camp, to the next stage, or do we have to wait another day or so? Another thing that they have to consider here is how fast do they want to climb up the mountain? It's a very tall mountain, and you're dealing with a lot of oxygen things, a lot of health things that you have to consider in order to do that as a team. But the important thing to say here is that it's not the ultimate goal to get everybody to the top of the mountain. It's the team that counts. That crystallizes out this leadership, this simulation crystallizes that out. You don't only have to think about yourself. You have to think about someone, and it might be that only 1 or 2 people get up to the top of the mountain. Could you go to the next slide? Thank you. So what it really does is it shows you how you can effectively manage a team. Then it also shows you how you can improve your decision-making, your individual decision-making, but also your team decision-making. It also shows you how can you manage asymmetric information, because when you climb the mountain and you get a lot of information there, you have to figure out what's important for you to achieve your goals, but what's also important to achieve the goals of your team. And then another thing that that the simulation points out here is how do you deal with trade-offs? In this case, trade-offs for tasks, for short-term tasks, things that you have to decide on the fly immediately when you climb the mountain. And what are the long-term goals or long-term tasks that you have to consider there? And then also, how does it interplay your own personal preferences, your cognitive biases? How do they kind of filter into your decision-making and your team's decision-making? So that's kind of an overview of the objectives that you can really get out of this particular simulation. And that kind of contributes for you to get the team leadership badge in this case. And here's basically a rendition of the main screen, how you can play this, the main communication screen, kind of the landing page. So what you have is here you have you take your profile, basically in this case you have 5 team members here. You might have an experienced mountaineer, a doctor, an environmentalist, a photographer, And once you get the information for your profile, you prepare yourself, you look at this information, you take this information and analyze it, and then you make again a decision as far as yourself is concerned and the team. And you take those bits and pieces of information that you have, the weather conditions, the health conditions of your members, the resources that you have, the average hiking speed, or how fast do you want to ascend to the top. And all of this information you see here on the right-hand side of the screen, you have five or six camps that you have to go through. And every time you get to a camp with your group or your team, you have to decide, do we have the right setup to go to the next base camp? And in this case, again, you're trying to get to 30,000 feet virtually, but it makes for a good team experience. Could you get to the next slide? And here, that's the setup, basically, how you can assess, how you can look at the results, basically. It gives you different points. And if you as, let's say, like as an experienced mountain climber, as a team leader, achieve all your goals, you get a certain number of points for that. And that's how you can kind of gauge and also assess the team or the individuals that play in this team. Could you go to the next slide? Another thing that that you can use is for the simulation and to assess the team, and what the team badge in this case is that you can use common or widely used rubrics. One of them is the ACU rubric that kind of scores teamwork, and it looks like the team contributions. What were the team dynamics like? What were the individual contributions of the team member? And were you as a team member able to create a good group climate or not? And how did you respond to conflict in a group? Were you able to mitigate that? Or was it a persistent or an ongoing problem? So that's one way of assessing the team skills that you acquire through simulation. Could you go through the next slide? So another way of teaching leadership. In this case, when you teach leadership, when you break it down like that, you teach individual leadership, then you're teaching leadership when you're part of a group. Then you can also teach leadership when you're part of an organization, when you're part of an institution that looks out for the greater good. In one example where you can see this organizational leadership skills is also a multimedia case from Harvard Business Publishing. It's called the Columbia case, and it talks about NASA and the Spatial Columbia accident, the explosion, and shows you how this organization and how the different departments and people responded to the entire incident. So I don't know how far you guys can remember what Columbia was all about, but on February 1st, 2003, Columbia descended into the atmosphere, and then after a while disintegrated, fell apart and blew up, basically, essentially. The cause of this was because after takeoff for the mission, a piece of the foam of the heat shield broke off and damaged one of the wings of the Columbia Space Shuttle, which became a problem when the space shuttle re-entered again. Then it ultimately caused the explosion. So what this kind of setup asks you to do is basically being part of an organization. It puts you into kind of a scenario where you work with 3 managers and 3 engineers, and you kind of have to reimagine the re-entry, the process, and what happened during this time, and look at the organizational and team dynamics there. What kind of decisions would you make, and those kind of things. Could you go to the next slide, please? So what we're talking about here is we're talking about organizational decision making and catastrophic failure. And what it helps you to do is, as an organizational member, it helps you to figure out or understand how failures work, how to interpret and analyze failures. And in this case, when you talk about failures, you have to look at the bigger scheme of things, the organizational thing. So what contributed to those failures, to this disaster, basically? Was it on the part of NASA? Was it financial constraints? Was it because it had a autonomous, like leadership structure, where management and engineers were basically, like they had a very vertical chain of command? Was it because there was no communication in the organization? What happened to the engineers? Were they keen enough to speak up because they tried to? Did management listen? No, they didn't. So all of those things you kind of learn, and put your feet on the ground, put yourself into the shoes of a manager, and learn how to manage in crisis situations. And that awards you, or that gives you a feeling for how organizations work, and that might be comprehensive enough to award digital organizational badge, in this case an organizational leadership badge. Could you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So that's the team that of those 7 astronauts that kind of lost their lives in 2003, and it's still debatable. One thing that I wanted to point out is, could you go to the next slide, Justin? These are some of the questions that people ask themselves after the accident, but also decades after the disaster. And they looked at, what was the culture of NASA like? The organizational culture, the leadership culture. A person I worked with, she worked on the investigation team. And one of the things they found out, they coined the phrase, it's called for organizations, it's called the standardization of deviance. So for mid-sized and bigger organizations, it can happen that failure becomes the norm or standard. That you start accepting failure as normal, and you don't pay attention until something happens. This happened in this case. It also, one of the questions is how did NASA deal historically with foam strikes? History tells that, they kind of anticipated some of those foam strikes or some of those particles falling off upon this case, upon launch and then re-entry into the Earth atmosphere. Another thing that people have to contend with if they go through this organizational scenario is how does this accident compare, in this case, to, let's say, Apollo 13, but also the Challenger accident in 1986. So we're really talking about the behaviors of managers and engineers and how the scenario kind of plays out. And it really puts you into a really interesting spot, and you really have to earn your badge in this case, going through the assessment, answering those questions, but also getting information from, in this case, the multimedia case, how people responded to that. That's a lot of evidence, that they can go into a badge. And if you do a good job in preparing your response to this problem, that could be something that you can put in an essay or whatever, and that could be good evidence for a badge to show you, maybe future employer, that you have good organizational skills and good leadership skills. Could you go to the next slide? So thank you for this presentation. Sorry that there was a brief interruption. I really apologize. And now we wanted to open it up to questions and see what you guys were thinking about, the entire setup of the leadership course, badges in general, the recognition of badges. One question was would you recommend awarding 3 individual badges on this course, or should we do one big badge where we can lump all the evidence together? This is one of the things that we contended with. So with that, I just open it up to the floor and see what people have to, what people think about, what questions you have. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Christian, I have a question.
Yeah.
How do you do grading? So is your whole course graded on the progress that the students make toward the badges, or is that one element of your course? And then when you are grading with badges, do you grade based on which level they get to? A certain level? Is it gamification where they reach that, they earn the badge completely and they get an A, they get to a certain step of Mount Base Camp and they get a B? Can you talk a little more about that?
Very good question. Thank you. So how the grading works, you saw like a kind of broke it up into 3 parts, this course. And you can envision that you can earn approximately 30% for each part of this course of your overall grade. And for each level, for each badge or mega badge, I want them to reach at least a certain level, in this case, approximately 70%. And you can very easily do that because you have different pieces of evidence and assessment. Let's say like for the team challenge, you not only have to write a reflection respond to how they dealt with the team in introducing like their conceptual knowledge into this discussion. I also have like the simulation that shows me, like, did they really care about that? Did they really put some effort into that? Because it shows, doesn't mean that they really reach the summit of Mount Everest, but it shows if they didn't respond to challenges or didn't pay a lot of attention to that. You have here basically the grading rubric that the simulation gives you, but also the essay that shows if they have good knowledge of the concept of the constructs, but also, like how they responded to that. Yeah, so that's.
So Christian, would you say that obviously you have grades in your course, but the badge itself, would you say, is that a bit more competency based in that there is a threshold to be met, and then if students meet that threshold, they then earn the badge?
Exactly. And I've thought about that for some things. Sometimes we have to make decisions, especially in graduate work. For most of the for a lot of the graduate schools, you have to earn at least a B or better in order to pass your graduate course. And that's the same thing here. You have to reach a certain level, and satisfactory is not good enough. It has to be at least, I would say, a C or a good performance in order to earn this badge. And this work has to be really, like, of professional quality and level. And what we were thinking about is, as well as if someone wants to have a badge, there might be also an opportunity for another faculty member to endorse him or her, to show them, like, your work and say, like, could you write me a little, like a little comment or stuff like that into my digital badge that I have another endorsement. That might be an example.
We still have a few more minutes left. Are there any other questions? You can put them in the chat if you're unable to access through your mic and video.
Let me ask you this, open it up to a wider audience. Did any one of you guys ever use badges? Or if you look at badges, what might be some of the things how you would integrate personally in your classes or in your work, in your coursework, or with your students' badges? How can you envision that?
We have a comment in the chat. I don't know if you're able to access that, Justin or Christian.
Let's see. What?
It says, will that happen? Students earn grade or credit unit, but not earn any badge. Thank you for that question, Edward.
So, Justin, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think that would be a question for you. Like, right? Is the question, is it possible that the student, successfully completes the course yet doesn't earn that badge?
So yeah, that's a good question right now, especially in the current climate. We know that most of the institutions, what credit or non-credit, depending on if you reach a C minus or higher. That usually equates to 70%. So in this case, to make sure that the work is professional, I might have to specify more detailed criteria in order to give them credit. So if they earn like a C minus, this C minus has to be of professional quality. And if I detail more the assessment, that might be, might be a possibility to give them credit for that. Otherwise, they might have to earn a higher level, a better grade, and unless otherwise they wouldn't get credit for that. So C minus would be cutoff point, but this C minus will be earned. So be very detailed, and it has to be of quality. So it has to be vetted before I tell them, like, that's something that you can really put into a digital badge and put into a portfolio, whatever they want to do with that.
So I saw in the comments someone asked about the iceberg slide. So I'll just share that real quick. Oh. There we are. And I don't know if there was a specific question about it or not, but this was just, it was just an attempt to try to make visible the idea that learning happens, across our lives, and there are kind of different degrees of visibility for learning. We might acknowledge learning as significant or worthwhile, yet we don't have good ways of making it visible, making it reputable. Learning that happens in the co-curriculum or through work experience may be every bit as valuable as learning that happens in a formal curriculum, but we don't have as good ways of making that count in the same ways, in the same formal kind of ways.
So I know you, sorry, I know you said that in the description you talked about how badges could stack. Potentially you get small skill areas that show that when together you got a more comprehensive set of skills. This looks like you're doing this all just right now within one course, which I guess is part of the pilot. Have y'all talked about how you could potentially have stacked badges across multiple courses?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, we've talked about it. We don't have a pilot for that yet, but I think that's a great opportunity. I mentioned program level objectives. So at least in higher ed, we're tasked, like for accreditation reasons, we're tasked to try to make visible, quantifiable that we are meeting these program level objectives. And sometimes, the idea there is with program development and course design, there's another example of where all those learning objectives are supposed to, course level learning objectives are supposed to stack up to program level objectives and so forth. But another way that you might be able to get at those program level objectives could be through micro-credential, let's say, projects, right? That could span entire programs. Maybe a student, is in a club in the co-curriculum, and their work in that club ties in really well with, for example, a leadership course. And they're able to apply what they're doing in their club to perhaps, earning a leadership micro-credential. So I think that there are interesting opportunities for that. And going back to the lifelong learning, interesting opportunities for that kind of stacked approach over the course of who knows, of many, many years. I think the challenge is to do that in ways that are capable of being flexible and capable of being dynamic for learners, and not just jump through these hoops and then earn this micro-credential.
So the reason I ask is we actually have a couple of our education programs that are trying to restructure their offerings to use an industry competency framework. And so that's crossing, depending on which program they've either got, I believe it's 12 courses or 9 courses that are included in their program normally. And this seems like a more useful way potentially than the competencies within Moodle to be able to externally show that you actually obtained all of those skills or those competencies.
Yeah, right. No, it's a great idea. I know a lot of folks are trying an approach like that, right? Where, hey, you know, in the course of working through the formal curriculum, let's also try to build in some sort of formal certification, right? A lot of programs do that already, try to make their curriculum align with external standards, competency frameworks. But just like you say, this might be a way to, instead of using like the competency tool in Moodle, using badging, which you can also do in Moodle, but then make it a little bit more accessible and shareable outside of Moodle. And the part that I like is potentially, you know, put a little bit more of that authorship and curatorship into the hands of the learners themselves to say, hey, this is your learning record. You're gonna care and foster this for forever.
All right, thank you.
Can I jump in
Thanks
here?
for the question.
Jeff, you brought up a very good point, and we're trying to do something similar in our business and technology department as well. We have different skill courses, and depending on major assessments in each of those courses, we're trying to get them a range of skills, basically. Let's say like business analytics. That could be a badge, you know, like for analytics, if they have to analyze a big data set. In business communications, they might have to write a research proposal. That could be something else. If they write a research proposal for GRAIN, that could award them, you know, like a credential and stuff like that. So yeah, I think more and more institutions, especially in those times, go towards that to have additional benefits and additional things for their curriculum. So thank you very much for bringing that up.
Excellent. Thank you so much for this incredible session. I'm just going to say my formal thank you and end our recording. And then if you want to stay on and continue with questions afterwards, that will be great. I've added a couple of links into the chat. Please check those out. One is for the evaluation for some MootCoin for the last little stretch. And then also the link to our closing session, which is in 8 minutes. So I'll end the recording here, but again, thank you so much for your presentation today.
Thank you.